On what issue is that? I mean, what issue could be so thorny that, you know, the protection of Nigerian interests will mean the non-protection of U.S. interests, or the protection of U.S. interests will now mean the non-protection of Nigerian interests? What sort of issue could bring up this sort of conflict?
There are many.
For instance?
Let me give you 1, 2, 3, or 4 like that. One, the issue of same-sex marriage. It's going to be a case of order and counter-order.
A lot of people think that might not come up in this visit.
Well, let us assume it's not raised.
Yes.
If it is not raised within the 40-minute official discussion,
yes,
it can be raised on the margins of discussion.
That's on the one hand.
Now, there is the issue of Africa Command.
Okay.
The United States has special interest in maintaining physical, effective presence in the Gulf of Guinea. Argument 1 is that, look, they do not want terrorists in that area. Argument 2 is now an oil-rich area, and the oil found there is just like the bonillite, all right? Not more of sulfur. It's not sulfuric at all, so it's cheaper to manufacture. So the Americans, about 6, 7 years ago, wanted to move the headquarters of the AFRICOM from Germany to Nigeria in particular. I say to Nigeria in particular. Many countries in Africa, in the West African region, wanted to host the headquarters of the AFRICOM. But the Americans refused. The Germans in Stuttgart, location of the headquarters, were complaining bitterly, and the Americans decided to relocate the headquarters to Africa, particularly to Nigeria. But Nigeria kicked against it. All right? It was also controversial, but Nigeria kicked against it, which prompted or which compelled the U.S. government to postpone the relocation for 10 years. We've had 6, 7 years now. In the next 3 years, it will be an issue. But since we now have a president they want to relate with, they may not wait for the next 3 years. They will raise it. That's one issue of controversy. There is another issue, and that is the case of non-surrender of American soldiers. All right? The ICC. Yeah, precisely. Now, when the matter was initially raised, the International Criminal Court came as a result of the invasion of Iraq, you know, the saga in Bosnia, the attack in Afghanistan. So terrorism became a major issue. You will recall that when we were talking about bipolarity, it was the issue of communist ideology that prompted that. And by 1989-1990, when it became clear that communism will no longer be a threat, terrorism replaced communism as an ideology. And from 2001, following the World Trade Center's saga, all right, Americans have been fighting tooth and nail terrorism. And in this case, terrorism became the main issue. And what would lead to the ICC was that everybody now thought that, look, many heads of states, many leaders were genocidal in their character, in their attitude, in their administration. They were no longer respecting human rights. They are talking about crimes against humanity. And there was need to put an end to that. That was how the parliamentarians of the world generally met. And our own Senator Dagash was a member of the World Action Group meant to deal with this matter. He told us that Nigeria was the 39th signatory to the making of the ICC. Americans did not sign, all right? They had sentiments for, they did not sign the ICC statutes, but they went around to go and negotiate what is called bilateral agreement on non-surrender of American military personnel. That's the name. Now, to negotiate with them to say, look, under no circumstance would they want to accept the trial of an American soldier, American military personnel outside of America. That if there was and if there is an American soldier found guilty of violating human rights or of committing any crime against humanity or whatever, he or she should only be tried within, please note the word within the United States, and note again, tried by an American court. So this time, it was proposed to Nigeria, but Nigeria did not accept. This Senator Dagash we are talking about made it crystal clear by that time that, look, at the end of the day, it is not consistent with our own interest. And the main argument given, which was quite valid, is that, look, the ICC status constitutes a supranational authority creating a supranational obligation for Nigeria. Nigeria, again, has its own constitution that we will respect international treaties, international obligations. So, since Nigeria was the 39th signatory to the ICC, that means we had accepted the obligation of the ICC. Now, for us to now do another agreement with the US, bilateral agreement, promising not to send, not to extradite any would-be American offender, is a negation of the supranational obligation already contracted, which means that Nigeria did not and does not want to accept the supremacy of a bilateral agreement over a multilateral agreement, creating obligation for that.
Do you think our stance would have changed now if that pops up again?
No, it wouldn't have. Because at the end of the day, when al-Bashir came from Sudan for our summit here, AU summit, Nigeria did not extradite Bashir. What we did is to argue, and rightly too, that the AU organized the summit. Nigeria did not, on the basis of our own interests, invite him to come to Nigeria. No. He came on the invitation, on the instruction, on the directive of the African Union Commission. And he came. So when Nigeria was asked to release, to extradite Bashir, and Ambassador Olugben Gashiru was then the foreign minister, the point was clearly made to say, look, we have, on the one hand, the instruction by the AU, and we also have the obligation of the of the ICC.